Good evening and welcome. I'm Karen Elam, Director of the Levine Center to End Hate at the Jewish Federation of Greater Rochester. Our mission is to unite the Greater Rochester community in overcoming hate through education, dialogue, and positive action. Thank you so much for joining us for Asian Matters, Standing with Rochester's Asian American Communities, a three-part series developed by the Levine Center to End Hate in partnership with Monroe Community College's Department of Global Education and International Services. We began planning this series in March amid reports of increasing attacks on Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders around the country that have numbered nearly 4,000 since the start of the COVID-19 pandemic, reaching an inconceivable level of violence with the slayings of 6 Asian women in Atlanta in March. While we're encouraged to see elected officials, businesses, celebrities, members of the sports community, and others speaking out against the violence and taking action to address these hate crimes, each of us can also play a role by educating ourselves and taking action. That is the intent of our series. By centering the voices of local Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders, we hope to introduce you to people and ideas that you may not be familiar with. Local Asian American change makers round out the final session of our series this evening. Their activism on behalf of refugees, the LGBTQ community, and others breaks down divisions that can become a source of hate. And now let me introduce the moderator for today's program and member of the Levine Center Steering Committee, Tiana Flynn Stevens. Tiana is the Communications Officer at the Greater Rochester Health Foundation. She has been featured in the Democrat and Chronicle paper as a woman to watch for both her media and editorial work and her considerable community service. She serves on several boards and committees, too many to number at this point, but we're thrilled that she is a member of our Levine Center to End Hate Steering Committee. So with this, I'd like to hand it off to Tiana.
Thank you, Karen, and good evening, everyone. Happy Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. Can't believe it's already May. I'm Tiana Flynn Stevens, as Karen said. I'm honored to be your moderator for tonight's program. So like Karen said, after a tumultuous 2020 and especially the horrific attack in Georgia this past month, we've seen an increased attention on Asian American and Pacific Islander communities. The Stop Asian Hate hashtag on social media has been trending, and many people have been asking, what can I do? How can I help? Tonight's panelists are just the people to answer that call. They have decades of combined experience, and they'll share with you tonight how activism takes many forms, one of those being education. So you've already taken the first step by spending your Sunday evening with us. We hope you'll take away some knowledge from the discussion, as well as new resources to add to your toolbox. And I know you'll be inspired by their stories. We are so lucky to have them in Rochester. I'm originally from Denver, Colorado. I've called Western New York home for the past 14 years. One of the things I love most about this city is that it's small enough that you can really make a difference, but I also find that it's big enough that I'm always fortunate to meet new people, and tonight's panelists are included in that. Our program is only an hour. It's going to fly by. So after my introduction of each speaker, you'll hear their stories, and then we'll follow up with some questions. Following that, you're invited to send in your own questions using the Q&A box. We'll take as many as we can get to in the time we have. And remember, all of our panelists are local, they're accessible, so these conversations can continue beyond tonight, and we hope that happens. Our first speaker is Joshua Wu. Joshua is a vice president at Edelman Data and Intelligence. He's an analytics and data science team lead who integrates social science best practices with rigorous evidence-based analytics to identify key findings and communicate actionable insights for clients from Fortune 100 companies across all sectors to nonprofits and public policy advocacy groups. He's also actively involved with diversity and inclusion initiatives with Edelman. Next, we'll hear from So Win. So came to the United States as a refugee from Burma in 2007. She is a Karen ethnic, one of more than 130 ethnic minorities in Burma. She's currently a PhD candidate at the State University of New York at Buffalo, majoring in global gender and sexuality studies, where her focus is on gender equality and violence and discrimination against women and minorities. Finally, we'll hear from Jeremy Tjhung. Jeremy moved to Rochester in 2018 with a one-year mission to volunteer, to work on campaigns, and to register as many voters as possible. 3 years later, he's still here, working on community outreach for Moms Demand Action, the Rock Against Violence Coalition, and Indivisible Rochester. He's also worked with the Memorial Art Gallery, Artists Coalition for Change Together, the Out Alliance, and the Rochester Public Library. He's hopeful that 2021 will bring renewed life to the activist community and that everyone will vote in upcoming local elections. So thank you very much for joining us. And now I'll give the floor to Joshua.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight. I would like to share sort of what I've learned in the workplace and how we can help to reimagine what it means to be an activist. As this recent slate of anti-Asian violence has occurred, I started to ask myself a question: how can I use the influence I have to be a change, to be a force for good? And I thought about all the places that I am in, and I realized that I spend most of my time at work. And so I decided and thought that it was important for me to explore what it meant to be an activist at work in the spaces that I was already in, and to think about what are the ways that I can use my influence there. We have heard a lot of companies do a lot of good work, from putting out statements of solidarity to taking active steps to have partnerships with different nonprofits. Those are all very important, and I would encourage people to keep doing that and to keep encouraging your companies to do that in the spaces and sectors that you're in. But tonight, I want to focus on what we can do as individuals in our workplace, and to think about what are some ways that we can be intentional in seeking to influence change where we are. First, I would like to encourage people who are to think about what are ways that we can invite people to the table. While we do spend a lot of our time at work, oftentimes we might feel the need to hide part of who we are to not have that show up at work. That can be at one time useful for work, but I think in these times that are tumultuous and challenging and divisive, work and the common bonds we share with people that we work with can be one place where these critical conversations can happen. So if you are in a place of influence at work, I would invite you to think about intentional ways that you can invite people to the table to create spaces for people, for your staff to have these conversations. Your staff should not be surprised by the first time that the company cares about something through a PR statement, but instead should see each day in these spaces and times and conversations for people to think through and to be able to process all of the different challenges that they're facing. I also want to speak especially to Asian Americans here tonight. I want to encourage you to take initiative to speak up. There are a lot of stereotypes of us as hardworking, as sort of a model minority of people who should just, work hard and get ahead. Those might be true for many of us, but I would say that especially now, where people are hopefully asking and expecting and perhaps even inviting us to speak up, to take the initiative to speak up. Share your experiences. It can seem very foreign when we hear these messages of, over 4,000 cases of hate crimes. That can seem really distant to people. Share your own experiences. I've shared my own experiences of discrimination, of the first week at work when someone came to us and said, you look like someone who would work in a data science. And I just chuckled and laughed it off. But now looking back, that was definitely a racist incident. And I'm sure that many of us have had to go through or are still going through those experiences. So I would encourage you, take the initiative, find ways to speak up. And thirdly, I would just encourage us to know that this is not a process that will be easy. So I would just invite us and sort of encourage us to be iterating through different ways of engaging with your peers and your coworkers. I am privileged to be in a place where I can direct activities and actions, where I can mentor staff and to create spaces for them to better understand who they are. I feel privileged that I can help to facilitate company-wide conversations about anti-Asian racism and to create resources for people. These solutions and what they look like are going to differ based on your specific workplaces. So go and just iterate through, try different things, be innovative. These are very challenging problems, and these are things that we can't solve overnight. But I am confident that if we all seek to be active and to be activists and to reimagine what it means to be an activist, to think about how we can use our influence in the workplace. The Edelman Trust Barometer finds that now over 2/3 of people, both in the US and around the world, expect businesses to act and lead on social issues. So let's do that. But let's start by first thinking about all the ways that we can be activists for change, to stand up for the marginalized, to speak up in our places of work, and most importantly, to think and be intentional about using our influence, however big or small, to be agents of change. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joshua. And next we will hear from So.
Hello, everyone. My name is So Win. I originally came from Burma, also known as Myanmar. I came here in 2007 as a refugee, and I'm now proud to say that I'm a US citizen. I'm also a current ethnic, one of the ethnic minority in Burma. There's some more than 130 ethnic minority in the country. For some of you who don't know Burma, the way I explain to them is that, you know India, you know Thailand, you know China, so we are literally located in the middle. We are neighbor to China's and Thailand's and India. So today I'm going to share a little bit about my education, so how that motivated me to be involved in community, as well as to share about my current activism with you. I'm a current PhD student at the University of Buffalo. I study, my major is global gender and sexuality study, where I mainly focus on violence and discrimination against women and minority, including LGBTQ plus community. And in fact, I did my master thesis in violence and discrimination against transgender individual. That's my thesis I did in my master degree. So that's where I came from. So I'm always interested in raising awareness about violence and discrimination against women and minority people. Over time, I learned that you cannot solve the problem unless you identify the problem. So you really have to identify the problem first before you can come up with the solution. So I do appreciate Levine Centers and all the organizers and everyone who participated in this webinar. I do appreciate that. So my social movement, my activism, I have to admit that it didn't really start until the last 3-4 years and during last administration when Tjhung was the president. I did notice that there's so many going on, especially his policy against refugee and immigration. So I did participate in 2 of the protests. That was my very first protest, and I was honored to be guest speaker on one of the protests that happened in front of City Hall here in Rochester. And I share about my experience as a refugee and how American offer freedom and justice for me. And that was an honor to be part of that. And then that's how really I started to be more involved in community. And my recent activist work right now, it's based on what is happening in Burma right now. So Burma had been under dictatorship for so many years, for the last 50 years or so. There's so many civil war, a lot of ethnic cleansing going on. You might heard about ethnic cleansing against Rohingya a minority Muslim people, and the military also did this to my people. That's why we fled, we left the country, and we came here. Many of us came here as a refugee. However, I have to say that for the last 5-7 years, the country was slowly transitioned from dictatorship to democracy. Things are changing a little bit, but all of a sudden, in February this year, the government, the military decided that they took over power again. They stayed a coup, and then they started to arrest and elected leader, democratically elected leader, including Aung San Suu Kyi and activists. They start to kill children, peaceful protester. And so me and a group of my other friends here in Rochester, I would say probably 5 or 6 of us together, we started to had a meeting, and then we organized protests last month, 3 of them last month here in Rochester. One of the goals is that we want to show solidarity with the people in Burma. We also want to show that we are against military coups and killing of innocent peoples, and arresting elected leaders and stuff like that. At the same time, we also want to raise awareness about what's going on in Burma. We also want, especially here in local community Rochester, we want to raise awareness, and we also want to tell them there's a huge ethnic minorities and people from Burma here in Rochester. So yeah, pretty much that's what I've been doing, raising awareness. So I have to say that my social movement, my activism always involve raising awareness about violence and discriminations, as well as trying to encourage many people, especially women and minority, to participate and involve more in activist work. Thank you.
Thank you so much, So. And we'll just give Jeremy a moment to turn his camera on and his microphone.
There you go. Hi, my name is Jeremy Tjhung. I got a nice introduction, so I can skip a little bit. I'm going to take you all the way back to, all the way back to my childhood, because a lot of my experience being part of multiple cultural groups really kind of brings me back to my childhood. My father's Chinese. My mother was Irish, German, and Jewish, which when you think in the 50s, to have an Asian man marrying a white woman was very, very unusual, and they were not a military couple, and they were on the East Coast. So again, multiple layers of otherness happening to me. I grew up in Erie County as the only Asian family in a small farm town that was 30% Native American, where I kind of learned the social pecking order as the only queer Asian kid in school. I definitely had a lot more to prove, and there was definitely the specter of otherness, the feeling of otherness as I was growing up. As I look back on it, I understand now that at that time, most of their fathers were Vietnam vets, and the kids carried their dad's experiences and prejudices down with them. I understand that now. I did not understand that as a child in elementary school in a rural upstate town in the 70s. I was also a city mouse as opposed to a country mouse. I never felt comfortable in a rural environment. So that's another layer of otherness that I was experiencing as a child. As soon as I could, I moved to New York City, where I found that I could be ethnically unclockable. I fit in being mixed and dark featured. I fit in most neighborhoods. I could go to Asian or Turkish or Greek or Latin neighborhoods, and people would just start speaking to me in whatever language they expected me to speak. And it was that fluidity and that kind of ability to be anonymous that let me feel free, that let me experience life not burdened by this feeling of otherness. I worked in fashion, which is a very diverse business, especially with Asians. I was adopted very early on in one of my first jobs by a Korean family. They were from Hawaii, and they taught me the term hapa, which means half mainlander or half white. I learned so much about Haole culture and Hawaiian culture from them. I just want to give a little plug. There is a book and a project called the Hapa Project by photographer Kip Fulbeck, who documents all different mixes of Haitian people from all around the world in portraits and stories. I would totally suggest anybody who is part of a mixed family to explore the Hapa Project. Because it really, like, I just discovered it like 15 years ago, and it just kind of switched a little light bulb in my head of this feeling that I'm not alone and that the otherness was lifted. As an Asian undercover gay man, I'm going to kind of call my gay community out. And I'm not going to say queer because in my experience, it was gay men that were so horribly racist, especially when you think in the last like 15 years of dating app culture, when phrases in your profile like no femmes, no fats, no Asians were not only commonplace, but were not called out by other people in the community for a long time. I'm out of the dating games. I'm not on the apps. I don't know if that environment has changed, but in the 90s and the thousands, that was one of the things that, I mean, the things that I heard in conversations among groups of gay men about Asians, because I was ethnically unclockable and people did not really call me out as Asian. They would shock you and kind of make you feel differently about the intersectionality that we're experiencing now and maybe appreciate it more, because I certainly hope that we're having better conversations now. So feelings, I'm going back and forth from my childhood because I felt so vulnerable being part of these multiple other communities. And then I kind of floated through the middle part of my life, not being touched by it, going to a large city, feeling kind of integrated. And then all of a sudden, the Pulse nightclub shooting happened in Orlando. And I felt all of a sudden so vulnerable as a queer person that this kind of violence could happen out of the blue for no other reason than my queer identity. And it kind of sends you back to your childhood place where you feel unprotected and unsafe. And similarly, when the shootings happened in Atlanta, it's another intersection of like the Venn diagram of otherness. It's like, all of a sudden it sends you to that vulnerable childhood place and you feel helpless and you don't know what to do. But if I could add a little bit of hope to that, we do know what to do. We can feel that way, but as adults, we can do something about it. And that's why I want to thank the Levine Center for putting together this forum, because it's so important for us to realize that we have agency and we can take action.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. And wow, to each of our speakers, I can relate to something that each of you said. And for Jeremy, when you said layers of otherness, I had to write that down. And you talk about the vulnerability that comes with that. That really hit me. I'm also mixed. My dad is Japanese and Irish, and my mom is Chinese and Spanish. They were both hippies and both Hapa. When I learned that word Hapa from my dad, when I was a kid, that, you know, and you said Hapa, that really made my heart smile. So, you know, learning that word really does give you a sense of community, and then finding that, oh, there's this book, there's this website, there's this whole community of us Hapa others, which has really come to be really mixed with Asian plus any other thing. And then Joshua, when you talked about speaking up in the workplace, I shrink a little at myself, because when, you know, in my 20s, as a teenager, in grade school, I always just brush stuff off, you know, didn't want to cause a disturbance, even though like I would go home and really like cry about it. It really took me till I was in my 30s to speak out. So speaking up is important, because especially when it comes to workplace jokes about Asian people, for some reason, that seems to be widely accepted. I have to find it within myself, and it's uncomfortable. I have to find it within myself to say like, hey, that's not funny. That's actually inappropriate and it's hurtful. And this is why. And in the times that I've done that, it's been, you know, the other person has always been receptive, and feel like I couldn't live with myself if I didn't do that. And you said identifying the problem and naming it is the first step. Dr. Ibram Kendi says, you know, that's the first step that anyone needs to take if they're going to embark on this anti-racist journey. So don't call it a microaggression, call it what it is. It's racism, right? So we're going to dive into our questions now for our panelists. Increasingly, we expect our businesses to lead on issues of social concern, but we don't want them to be performative, right? So releasing a statement demonstrates a company's commitment on one level, but there's so much more work that really needs to be done internally. So Joshua, this question, we'll start with you. What specific steps would you suggest to the leadership of businesses?
Yeah, so I would say two. I think one is for HR to really think intentionally about identifying potential bias, both in hiring, in a recruitment, in promotion, and in exit. To what So was saying, we can't begin to solve the problem until we begin to identify and measure it. And so I'm actually involved in some efforts to work with our HR team to think about can we identify trends or biases? Because I think for a lot of companies, we sit on all this data, but we just choose not to look at it. Sometimes it's because we don't have time. Oftentimes it's because we may not want to confront what the data is showing us. And so I would definitely encourage stakeholders and companies to think hard about ways that HR can be involved. Secondly, it's to say that if you want to lean in on this, you cannot just have a statement. You do not get to check a box and then say, okay, now we're done. I'll see us next year. I would say start small. If your company currently doesn't have a space for employees, not just Asian employees, but sort of just employees to have a way to provide feedback to managers and stakeholders, I would start there. Keep it casual. In this time of Zoom, obviously, we don't have prototypical water coolers to talk around, but we can have a virtual happy hours. We can have meetings, right? I would start small, but be very intentional about creating a space that will invite people to come in and share the experiences. And then as you begin to build trust with your employees and as you begin to hear stories of the things that they're actually struggling with, then begin to build in programs as needed. But definitely do not stop at just a one-time press statement.
Yeah, that's excellent advice. Our next question is for Jeremy, and Jeremy, you gave us a lot in your introduction, but I want you to dive a little deeper into this question. How has your identity informed your activism? How has that evolved over the years?
Again, I think my identity was formed as a child with that feeling of being separate. And then it's just really in the last 5 years that I've discovered my activism. I think, it may be another switch that got turned on in me where I just felt like you get to the point where you can't do anything, you can't take any more and you have to do something. I was in a very unusual position in 2018 where I was between jobs and between apartments. And I have family here in Rochester, and it made perfect sense for me to come here to where I could make more of a difference. Nobody needs another liberal, activist in Manhattan standing on a street corner, banging a tambourine. But up here, I can stand on a street corner and bang on a tambourine, and I'll get a little bit more notice. And I'll find people, people in affinity groups much faster. That way. And I think that, just if a brief story, I was at a fundraiser. One of the first things I did when I moved to Rochester was go to a fundraiser for a candidate. And I was there wearing, because gun violence prevention is my big thing, I was wearing my gun violence prevention jacket. And across the room, I saw somebody clearly beautiful in hapa, wearing all kinds of gun violence prevention buttons. And I like to think that our hapa-ness brought us together, and our commitment to ending gun violence has kept us together. Sharon Sattler LeBlanc, I know you're listening, drive safely.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. Do any of our other panelists want to answer that question? Again, how has your identity informed your activism?
Sure, I can say a few things about it. Came in here as a refugee. It was difficult, and there was a cultural shock. There's so many different between here in America and back in my country. But I do learn that there's a lot of opportunity, education, job opportunities, and freedoms of religions and all of that. But at the same time, when you hear a lot of news that minority whether African Americans or Asian people being killed, it really hurt me. And I want to share that, as you heard, we came here with opportunity. No one want to leave their countries and came here as a refugee. Everyone left their country, but we have no choice. We came here. We just simply want to live, and we just want the freedoms and justice. So yeah, I just want to share with that, and then that's how I started to be more involved in communities and raise awareness about refugees, and they came here with opportunity American dream. So
Thank you and thank you so much for your activism. Joshua, do you want to share with us, was there something that happened in your career or in your personal life that has informed your activism? You've become this voice at Edelman.
Yeah, so I think for me, and I'll speak for growing up in sort of Asian American circles, it was always expected that I would work hard and succeed. Looking back on it, there were a lot of implicit pressures to be as white adjacent as possible, right? So I would do the things that all the honors and AP kids would do. And so I think growing up in my professional career, I didn't think of myself as Asian American until the last year or so. And it wasn't because people didn't mark me out as Asian or Taiwanese. It was because I was like, well, it doesn't matter. Like, I'm just here to do my job, do it well, go home, and serve the company. And I think what was really jarring for me was, as we saw in the last year of the intentional targeting of Asian Americans, I began to really see myself as one. And I think for many of us, I think that's a challenge that we have, right? To sort of navigate this tension of doing really well by sort of keeping our heads down and sort of taking the risk of speaking up. And I think for me, I realized that at the end of the day, I couldn't be the best staff and the best leader at work until I could fully embrace all of the different parts of who I am. And so I couldn't leave my Asianness at the door, right? I had to sort of lean hard into it. But I think in doing so, it actually created space for other people, and especially more junior staff, to really have the space to navigate that. And I think, as I shared earlier, I think this is one of the opportunities and obligations I would say that we have, is that if you have influence in your places of work, unless you lean in, people who may otherwise want to won't be able to.
Excellent points. Thank you so much. In my own career as a communications officer, when the Georgia attack happened, I had kind of prolonged writing a statement about that from our organization because it was such an internal thing to process. Every time you turn on the news, just more information. So you definitely made some good points and have given us a lot to think about. Next question. So this is for you. Your area of work and your studies involve violence against women and minorities. You're also passionate about motivating women to participate in movements in third world countries and to get involved in politics and social movements. What does that work look like? What are some of the challenges that you faced in doing this?
Sure. First of all, I try to, as I stated before, I try to identify the problem. So I always tell the women, especially in third world country, I bring up the statistics and how women are being discriminated and experience violence, especially domestic violence and all the issue. And then I encourage them to be, not to be afraid and, be part of communities, and, they don't have to be literally on the street to protest. They could do a lot of things. They can share information through Facebook or internet, or they could donate money. So there's so many things that they could do. So that's what I'm trying to encourage a lot of women to do. But the biggest challenge, it's I would say like a patriarchal, because especially in Burma, the country is very patriarchal. Not a lot of women would like to speak up. They fear. So that's like the bigger issue, I would say. Yeah.
Thank you. You made some very good points that I think can apply, right here in Rochester too, those baby steps, those small things that people can do to get involved in activism. And I want some of our other panelists, Joshua or Jeremy, to share what are some other small things that people can do.
Vote. That's definitely. There are so many issues, right? And honestly, we are at a very, very fortunate time right now. Besides the bleakness of the hate, we are at a time when conversations about race and violence and immigration and economic opportunities and social justice are being had. I think that the former third rails of conversation socially, like gun violence, 5-10 years ago, you could not talk about gun violence prevention. Now we're having really robust and substantive conversations. I think in the next 2 years, what we really need to do is to make sure that we're talking about voting. We're talking about representation. We're talking about registration. We're making sure that everybody is as informed as possible. And that's not a solo activity. That's something that the community can definitely get involved in. The best part about Rochester is that it's a small community. So if you want to make a difference, join a group. And if it's not the group for you, that group is going to know the group or somebody in another group that's really closely adjacent that's going to be able to help you out. I mean, we have a group against gun violence. If you want to look us up, plug for Moms Demand Action in the Rock. Look them up on Facebook. They have an AAPI hate forum going on right now because they know that there's intersectionality around gun violence. So if you want to join a larger organization, you can do that. If you want to join a smaller organization, find something in your community. What you need to do is ask around and be as verbal and vocal as possible.
Yeah.
And I think just to add on that, I think, something that Jeremy said that really resonates with me is the idea of, I think that we now have more resources on hand to be informed about these things. I remember when I was, so my kids are now 3 and 6. I remember when, even before they were born, trying to find books by Asian American authors was actually like really hard. And now I go to like Barnes and Noble or, any sort of big box store, and they have sections on it, right? And so I think, I would say that for a lot of people, speaking on these issues that perhaps you were not educated or sort of informed about can be really scary. I would say go and find resources. PBS has a great 4-hour series on the Asian American experience. There are countless documentaries and shows on Netflix or just any of these shows that we're binging already. I would say get some friends together. All decide to watch it, and then from a social distance or in someone's backyard, like just go talk about it, right? And I think that sort of having the agency to be able to inform and to educate yourself, I think is something that we can all do today.
Great advice. We're getting some questions now from the audience. One question that's came up twice: how do you respond when people stereotype you? Can you give us an example of how to reframe that? Like, say if someone asks you, "Oh, you look like you work in IT," or "You're good at math," those sort of things that we hear.
Yeah, I think for me, stereotypes are in many ways a way of which people wanting to engage you, but not having the right words or vocabulary. And so they will go back to stereotype because they think that by using humor or sort of what they perceive as humor, they can begin to have that conversation. I would say that the way you respond depends on how well you know this person, right? So if it's a person that you know well and you can pull them aside and be like, whoa, that was not cool, I would definitely do that. I think in cases where it's someone new, say in my case, it was a vendor that we've never met, that I've never met before, I would speak to someone else on the team just to sort of acknowledge that something happened and that this is the type of thing that is just unacceptable. But I think what I would hope that would happen is that people who are not being stereotyped would also speak up, right? So if you're in a space where someone says, "Oh, you look like someone from IT," I would hope that we would get to a place where someone who, in this case, is not Asian, would say, "Hold up, like, what do you mean? a person X looks like they're from IT. To have those allies so that the burden is not always on the person who is being stereotyped.
Yeah, I was in a situation once in a professional setting where I introduced myself and explained that I had 4 kids, and most of them are grown and in college, and someone commented, "Oh, you must have been a child bride," which I don't know what my face looked like, but it was probably like jaw dropped, but I didn't say anything in that moment. And I didn't know the person well. So I did go back to the organizer of that meeting and say, "I don't know if you realize this person made this comment and it made me feel this way." And she did resolve it, and the person reached out and apologized. So good advice again, Joshua. Thank you so much. Another question from the audience. How can we continue this conversation to ensure we are creating workplaces that value diversity and provide safe spaces for all groups?
So I think maybe, and I'll just share quickly on one thing that I found to be effective, is that there are senior stakeholders who are invested in it. And those people may or may not need to be part of that marginalized group, right? So in our case, in our company, we have senior stakeholders who are buying into the Asian American employee group that we created. They're not themselves Asian American, but I think that they didn't need to be the people that had the answers, but they needed to be the people that said, this is important that we create the space. I don't need to be part of it, but I want to make sure that the people who need to, or the people who want to have the space, have the freedom and agency to be able to have the space at work.
Thank you so much.
I think also part of creating safe spaces, I'm just going to speak from a mistake that I have made, is that if you are going back a little bit to the last question, if you are going to call somebody out and to do the not cool thing, everything is handled better in a private conversation, in a private email, in a private DM, whatever it is. Reply all is never the way to find peace. So I think creating safe spaces and knowing that there are safe spaces to have these conversations one-on-one, as opposed to calling somebody out in public, is always the best way to do it. And I wish that I knew that a year ago.
So we don't want to put people on blast in our social media. Is that what you're saying?
Well, I don't have social media, so you don't want to put people on blast in any way at all.
Okay, got it. So how about you? How have you responded to racist remarks, stereotypes, things like that, ignorance?
Well, I just ignore them simply. Or if they say something back to me, I would just have a good conversation. I don't show my anger, don't always respond to them in a really aggressive manner. I would say that just trying to explain your information. A lot of the time, the one thing that I heard, "Oh, your English is very good," I heard a lot, and I don't mind at all. I say thank you, thanks for your saying that. And then I started to explain about my backgrounds and my education, and then they learn to appreciate more. So I guess explain your story, don't respond that in anger manner, so and it will work out. So yeah.
So you turn that into a conversation starter and end up educating the other person about your story, your culture. I love it. The next question is for any of our panelists. You are all engaged in great work. How do you stay motivated to do this? What keeps you going? And Jeremy, you said you were going to be here for 1 year. It's been 3 years. How much longer can we have you here in Rochester?
Well, I'm here for the duration, from what I can tell. Sadly, it's the compounding of tragedies that keeps me going. And I hate to sound like I'm dependent on the news cycle for energy, but unfortunately, if I look at the course of the last few years, that is, it's the tragedies that definitely keep me going. Although now I have more hope. at this point. We worked very, very hard. So I'm speaking personally as a progressive lefty. We worked very hard to make progress, and we have seen progress. Yeah, sadly, it's the news cycle that's been motivating me lately.
I have a second part of the question for you, Jeremy, and this one is from Karen. Is there a uniquely Asian American perspective that activists like yourself bring to subjects other than your identity, so like with gun violence?
I am going, well, again, it's hard for me to tell this because it's my personal story, and it's very stereotypical. I was raised with an Asian father, and good grades were a must, and hard work was a must, and completing the job was a must. And that, I mean, I attribute that to my Asianness, and it's one of the things that I really value is, and I have found, oh God, I didn't want to cry. I found my family moving back to Rochester, and there is something just undeniably invigorating and grounding about finding my family. So those, I guess, does that answer the question? Because you made me cry.
Yes, thank you. And here's a virtual hug for you.
Thank you.
Any of our other panelists want to answer that question? Is there a uniquely Asian American perspective that activists bring to other subjects?
I think for me, it's the idea of always trying to understand, because I've been both present in rooms but invisible, right? So I think a lot about the idea that, growing up, I was often enough of being white adjacent that I could be in rooms and in committees where stuff was happening, but I would just sit in the back and say nothing, right? And now looking back, as I think about other types of justice things that I care about personally and also professionally, I think that experience of knowing how to get in the room, but then being able to say, okay, now that I'm in the room, I now have an opportunity to say something, because there are a lot of people who should be here that are not here, but I am here because I am more white adjacent than some of my more multicultural colleagues. Is then, okay, well, how can I best represent the voices that are not here in this room? And I think, going back to the idea of, there is a lot of privilege and influence that I think Asian Americans have, whether that's earned or given or sort of delegated to us. And I think that it's time for us to think intentionally about how can we use those influences and privileges that we do have to be advocates for those who are not in the spaces that we are.
Yeah, excellent points. And I love that Asian Americans came to support the Black Lives Matter movement, and vice versa, that we're seeing Black Lives Matter movement supporting the Stop Asian Hate movement. So love that synergy that's happening there. So I want to go back to the part A of the question. What keeps you motivated to do the important work that you're doing?
Sure. As I stated before, I'm always interested in violence and discrimination. So I would say that the tragedy, every time I hear the news about, this minority being killed or this people being abused or attacked, or I would say those motivate me to keep going. And, I learned that there's so many things that we can do and we can improve together as a community. So I would say those tragedy, especially what happened in Burma right now, the innocent protester being killed, the children being shot in the head, those kind of tragedy motivate me to keep going, so, keep doing that. So yeah.
Yeah, excellent. And I do want to give a shout out to the Levine Center to End Hate and the Jewish community for supporting the movement as well by hosting these very important forums. And a thank you again to our panelists, So, Joshua, and Jeremy, for sharing your stories, sharing your heart with us tonight. Thank you, Eric and Mabel, for your services tonight in interpreting our program. And thank you to all of the participants who tuned in and engaged with our speakers on a Sunday night. At this time, it's my pleasure to hand the program over to my Levine Center to End Hate colleague, Christina Haeyeon Lee. Christina immigrated to Rochester with her parents and sister from Seoul, South Korea as a child. She identifies as 1.5 generation Korean American or Asian American. She is the coordinator for the global education at Monroe Community College and was instrumental in creating and leading us through the Asian Matters series. Christina.
Thank you, Tiana. Thank you, everybody. I'd like to thank the nearly 100 people who joined us tonight for the third and last program in the Asian Matters series. Like Karen said, we started this series in March, not knowing how timely and necessary it would be. The violence against Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders continues. We hope that these programs will inspire you to continue learning about the incredibly diverse Asian American and Pacific Islander communities that we live among, as well as recognize the historical context that has shaped our country. We end the series with a focus on these local change makers so that we are reminded that we can all take action. Activism comes in many forms, small and large, individual and collective, public and private. We invite you to carry on the work of our Asian Matters series by sharing the recordings of our 3 programs with your friends and starting a conversation in your circles. Be sure to check out the Levine Center to End Hate website for more resources to continue your learning. And please join us for the annual Summit to End Hate on Sunday, October 17th, where we will continue to explore ways to address hate and bias against BIPOC and other minority communities. You'll find more information at endhaterock.org. Many thanks to Karen, Elam, Amy Shee, and all of our moderators and panelists for making this series so thoughtful, personal, and actionable. I also want to thank the steering committee of the Levine Center to End Hate at the Jewish Federation of Greater Rochester and the Global Education and International Service Department at Monroe Community College for support and promotion of this program. Lastly, please help us continue to improve our programming by filling out the survey at the end of this event. It just takes a minute. Thank you for attending on this Sunday night, and have a good night. We hope to see you soon.